Now, your 30s and 40s are the two biggest decades when it comes to building long-term wealth. However, so many people have other things going on in their life, like marriages, kids, mortgages, and moving houses. They can find it incredibly difficult to actually know what to do with their money. And I see the same mistakes made time and time again with my clients. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through the 5 biggest mistakes that I see made and how you can avoid them moving forward. But if you're new here, my name's Ben, I'm a qualified financial planner, and my aim is to help as many people as possible gain clarity and confidence when it comes to their long-term financial plan. So the first one is something you've probably heard of before, and that is lifestyle creep. Now, what lifestyle creep means is that when you get a pay rise or a promotion, you will adjust your lifestyle to reflect that higher level of income. Now, that's all well and good, and I'm not saying for one moment don't enjoy that hard-earned extra income. What I would say though is if you're spending all that extra income on, things like going out, holidays, luxuries, etc., you haven't financially benefited really from your long-term perspective from that extra income. So what I like to say often to clients or individuals I speak to is when you get that promotion or that salary increase, what you want to try and do is look at that amount and say, how much of that do I actually need to be spending on things that are hard-earned and that I've worked hard to achieve versus how much of that can I actually look to save? And the rule of thumb really I would say is you probably want to look at spending 50% of that. So, as I said, I'm not for one moment saying don't, I suppose, expand your lifestyle based on that new level of income, but you probably want to look at trying to save half of that as well, whether that's through extra pension contributions, ISA contributions, or simply money going into your savings. Now, the second mistake is not having a financial plan. Now, this is one, again, I see time and time again, and is quite often the reason people come to me, a financial planner, in the first place, is because they know they've got a pension, they know they've got a savings account, they don't really know what rate they're paying on their mortgage, and they're kind of just winging it. And this is the biggest problem when it comes to building long-term wealth, because if you don't have a plan in place, you're not going to get very far. And it's the same context, I use the analogy around if you're trying to get to a destination and you haven't got a plan as to how to get there, how do you expect to get there? So what do I mean by this? This is where you need to be looking at your goals, your numbers, your timeline, and your monthly movements from a money perspective, both in and out. You need to actually work out what your long-term financial goals are, because if you have no long-term financial goals, how are you supposed to put a plan in place to get there? Now, this doesn't need to be complicated. It really doesn't. It can be very simple. For example, I want to retire at age 60. Just by having that plan written down is going to help massively in order to help you get there. So, as I say, it doesn't need to be complicated. You just need to have a plan written down, how you want to get from point A to point B, and a rough plan for getting there. Now, the third mistake is not putting as much into your pension as you should do. And, I get it. For people in their 30s and 40s, there are so many other expenses coming at you. Often, you've got a marriage, you've got kids you need to be looking after, things like that can make it very difficult to try and plan more longer term. However, the more you put into your pension earlier, the less you have to put in when you're older. So let's take an example of how that works in practice. If you're age 30 now, for example, and you think, I've got a wedding to pay for, I want to start planning for a family, I'll wait until I'm 40 to start planning for retirement. And at that point, hopefully I'm earning a bit more, I've got a bit more disposable income, and I can put maybe £500 a month into my pension, which is fine. However, if you start 10 years earlier, for example, age 30, you would only have to put in £250 rather than £500 into your pension, and you would still get to the exact same outcome when you come to retire. So the point I'm trying to make is that delaying is actually going to cost you a lot more in the long term. So the earlier you can start putting more into your pension, the better. Now, mistake number 4 is either having not enough cash or too much cash. And I think this is something, again, that people really overcomplicate, when in actual fact, it really doesn't need to be that complicated. If we look on the one hand of people not having enough cash, they're at risk of, potentially having their car break down, the boiler need repairing, things like that. Now, if you haven't got that money available to be spending on those sorts of things, you're going to have to either take out a loan or, spend money on the credit card. The problem with those two is that you are going to potentially put yourself in a position where you're not going to be able to pay those back in a short enough time frame, which therefore means you'll be paying a lot of interest on those loans or that credit card. Now, if you look on the other hand, you have too much cash. This is obviously a better position to be in than the former, but the problem with this is that you are not making your money work as hard as it could do for you. So what you want to try and do is have somewhere between 6 to 9 months of your kind of day-to-day living expenses saved in an emergency fund. So what does this look like in practice? So let's say your expenses are £2,000 a month. You want to try and have somewhere between £12,000 to £18,000 in savings as an emergency fund. Now, the fifth mistake is using tactics rather than strategy. Now, what do I mean by this? So we see it so frequently where people are so fixated on, the sorts of funds they're invested in, the platform they're invested on, whether they should invest a lump sum or monthly, what sort of credit card offers the best points. And all those things are great. The problem with that is that it's so the minutiae detail that you kind of forget the bigger picture and the longer term plan. So instead of focusing on those things which are more tactical, you want to be thinking a bit more strategically. And what I mean by that is you want to know what your retirement number is. So how much do you need to have in your pension to be able to retire? You want to automate your regular investments and savings. So instead of you having to manually put that money into your savings and investments when you get paid, it goes out automatically. You want to have a financial plan in place. So again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about knowing what your goals are, knowing what your objectives are, knowing your numbers, because those things are going to make a much bigger difference to your long-term financial wealth. So your 30s and 40s can make a massive difference to your long-term wealth. So what I would suggest you do is check out my other video talking about what your retirement figures are and how you can work out exactly how much you need to live a certain level of lifestyle in retirement. I'll link that video in the end screen. Hope you've got some value from the video, and if you did, please do subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.